functions in ES6 are amazing, and you're going to find yourself using them all the time, so pay attention. Arrow functions introduced a new way to write functions in JavaScript. Here's the old way. You have your function keyword followed by the name of the method, any parameters you want to pass, and in between the curly brackets you run some logic. In this case, we're just returning the sum of the two parameters, a and b. So if we were to run that, let's say our parameters were 2 and 3, we'd expect to see 5 here, right? And that's what we get. And here's the new way, the arrow function way, right? We have a constant declaring the add method. We set that equal to the parameters that we want to pass, a and b, and then we introduce this new arrow character, right? An equal symbol and a greater than sign. That's our arrow. And then everything else is the same, right? In between the curly brackets, we put our logic. In this case, we're just returning a and b. If we were to run this, we see we get the exact same result of 5. And they look really similar, right? They look really similar. Well, let's look at some key differences that make arrow functions stand out. First off, we don't always need to include these curly braces or this return keyword. If we know that we're just returning only a single line of code, then this is all we need to do. That's it. The arrow function takes care of the rest of it for us. In this example, we have two parameters, right? We have a and b because we're doing the sum of two different numbers. However, with arrow functions, if you ever only need to pass just one parameter, you can drop those parentheses altogether. Check this out. Let's say we wanted to find the squared value of a single number. In that case, we only need one parameter, right? The number itself. So here, 6 times 6 is 36. Look how clean that is. That's amazing. Arrow functions offer a very clean way to write functions and makes for some great code readability. Especially useful whenever you're using them as really quick callback functions, like this example. Let's say we have an array of numbers, and for whatever reason, we want to create a new array that represents the doubled version of each number. So instead of 1, we want to see 2. Instead of 2, we want to see 4. Instead of 3, we want to see 6, etc. So normally we would map over this array, and we would run a function against each number in this array. We can still do the same thing, but look how short that syntax is, right? And if we log this out, we actually get the result we expect, right? We get our initial array followed by the doubled version of that array. It's really cool. Or let's say one of the classic examples, a set timeout, right? You want to do something after a certain period of time, in this case, 1 second. You can just pop an arrow function in, do your console.log, and when you run that, after a second passes, you'll see your function execute. So cool. Now, let's talk about something that's been a thorn in the sides of many JavaScript developers for ages, and that is the this keyword. Normally, when working with functions in JavaScript, you're given access to the this keyword, aka the context you're currently in. Well, with arrow functions, they don't get a this value at all. They rely on the context of the parent they reside in. This concept is known as lexical binding. So let's take a look at this concept first. So I'm going to create a function, just like our add function up top. And inside of this, I'm just going to log the this keyword. Okay, so if I were to run that, you'll see that by default, this is defined, right? We get an object that's attached to this function. Now, if I were to do the same thing against an arrow function, so it's the same arrow function that we saw working before. If I were to run that this time, though, we get an empty object, okay? And that's because the arrow function's this keyword does not come defined by default. However, if I were to nest that same child arrow function inside of a parent function, you'll notice that it gets access to that parent's this object automatically. So let's do this. Let's create a new function, and we'll call it parent. And inside of that function, we'll just log this. And then we'll also create a new arrow function inside of this method, okay, called child. And then we'll log this keyword as well, right? So in this method here, we notice that this keyword was empty. It was an empty object. But watch what happens here. We're going to go ahead and run child, and then we'll run the parent function as well. Check that out. So now we have two identical objects, right? This is the first one is this version of this, and then the second object here is this version of this. Now this instance of the this variable automatically gets access to the parent's this variable. So they're identical. Anything that you would be able to use in this parent this variable, you'd be able to use it in the child as well. Now, why is that important? That's important really because this new feature solves a really big headache when it comes to scoping, specifically in objects and callbacks. Let's look at an example, right? So let's say we have a person object, and in that object we have a name property, and let's say we have a greet property, and greet is a method. The greet method says that whenever it's called, it will wait 1 second and then print the person's name. So back in the day, we used to have to define that name variable first in order to use it inside the scope of the set timeouts callback function. So then we would do our set callback, and then here you can see that we are using an arrow function, but we won't use an arrow function here. We'll actually just use a regular function. Okay, and let's see what happens. This should get us, hello, my name is John, right? And that's fine, but if we were to simply use an arrow function here, right, and we'll leave name in place. If I play this, you can see that's working. However, the easier way to do this, now that this is automatically getting access to whatever the this value is here, let's see what this is here, right? Let's just do a console.log of this, right? And you can see it's the object, right? It's the object that this function belongs to, right? The scope of this function gets that John, greet, etc., etc., which is really fascinating, right? It's really awesome. So now instead of calling name here, what I can do is I can just get rid of this and I can just call this.name. And there we go. We have my name is John. While arrow functions offer conciseness and lexical this binding, there are some scenarios where traditional function expressions might be more appropriate. For instance, arrow functions cannot be used as constructors. They cannot be used as methods in objects, as they don't have their own this context. Arrow functions can't be used as generators. The bottom line, guys, arrow functions are a powerful addition to JavaScript, especially for writing more succinct and readable code in certain situations. However, it's essential to understand their behavior and limitations to use them effectively in your code base.